Good afternoon and welcome to our third part of the internal audit webinar. I see a few of you have joined us from episode 1 and now we have 3, and I guarantee you there's so much to pick. And today we are focusing lots on technology and how technology is going to enable better functionality in terms of the internal audit section. We're going to give people about 3 minutes so that we can have more people join us. In the meantime, you can tell us where you're joining us from, comment on our previous webinars. If there are issues you'd like to see in our next episode, highlight some, but first tell us your name and where you're joining us from. Hi, Cindy. The chat section is enabled. Kindly type your question there. I see your hand is raised. Hi, Kevin from Nakuru. Thank you for joining us. Moffat from Pioneer PSA Nairobi. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. So today, Kenyans have maintained, done really well in timekeeping. We have Caroline from Total Energies Marketing Uganda, Eric Masharia Simbako, Jane Mwanga Kampala, Jackson Jenga Credit Bank. Thank you so much, guys, for joining us. There's Calvin, who's joining from Imperial College Thika. Thank you for joining us, Calvin. We have Ibrahim from Rwanda. Thank you so much. Indiaka, I&M Kenya, thank you for joining us. We look forward to having more of you guys from I&M. We usually get quite a number from the team. Josephine Duarte, you and I Microfinance Bank, thank you so much for joining us. Job Musoba from Sassini PLC. Anthony Muthoka, Dalbit Group. Thank you guys for joining us. We have a Q&A section open. If you have questions in the meantime, you can be putting there ahead of time. We won't wait much longer. We've given about 5 minutes and there's so much. I promise you, you will leave with a lot today. So today our panelists, we have Zahir Sheikh. Zahir is the face that many have come to know, many have reached out to for diversified questions for forensic internal audits. And it's a pleasure to have you. He is a partner risk advisory, internal audit and forensics with decades of experience. He might look young, but yes, he's been in the industry for quite some time, handled different sectors in those different countries. We'll also have George Ndungu. George is the manager of internal audit, risk management across the East Africa region. George is really trying to catch up with Zahir, 15 years of experience there. And then we will later be joined by the man of the hour, who will delve very deep into technology, internal audit and technology, some robotics for you to get into, learn something from. His name is Neveland Moodley. He is the head of financial services technology from BDO South Africa. We work as one team. we share resources across the globe. So he might sit far, but he's available for any questions or meetings. You just let us know. I will now hand over the session to Zahir to take us through the agenda of the meeting.
Thank you, Virginia, and a very good afternoon to all of you. Very excited to be here once again, and very pleased to see so many of you back. We've got an exciting session today. Technology and auditors for some reason don't go together, and we're going to be looking at some of the reasons why this happens. But what we intend to cover today is what is the impact of digital revolution on the internal audit profession, particularly how we can use data analytics and automation within internal audit, how internal audit can adapt to some of these emerging technologies. We will also look at the role of internal audit in data governance, and then we will look at some of the emerging technologies themselves, and we'll be giving you some very exciting examples of how this is actually used. So, why does internal audit lag behind in technology adoption? Let's face it, this is the reality, and it's something that as a profession, we don't want to hide from it. Rarely are internal audit departments on the cutting edge of implementing innovations such as advanced data analytics, data visualization, robotic process automation, artificial intelligence, machine learning, as well as many other emerging technologies. And in my estimation, basically, if you look at the global survey report done by Productivity, internal audit leaders said that the area in which they have the largest challenge, which is in the skills and talents gap for enabling technology, including things like advanced analytics, automation, AI, machine learning, as well as process mining. Furthermore, when we asked internal audit departments that were currently hosting transformational initiatives within their organizations, 74% of chief audit executives replied, no, actually, we don't host any transformational initiatives within internal audit. They're quite happy with the old way of doing things. So while us internal auditors, we're very quick to point out that the rest of the organization could benefit from the use of technology, many of them admit that they themselves are not innovative in their department. And in my view, this disconnect might be one of the biggest issues facing our profession. And it puts this issue, it puts us at risk, because we are seen as laggards. We are seen as people who are staying behind. Many internal audit departments, we even know that we're supposed to do a much better job at adopting new technologies, but we struggle at transformational change. So why is this? We're like this beautiful black car in front of you. By the way, that car might look old, but it's a Bentley. But even if you take an old Bentley, and you take it into a race, even with the Toyota Corolla, the Corolla of 2022 is definitely going to give that old Bentley a race for its money. And I think that's our position as well as internal auditors. We may understand the basics of what we're supposed to do. We might be very good at doing our basics, but with data having grown the way it has grown exponentially, with the complexities that we have in large organizations, we simply aren't keeping pace. And that is really our challenge. So let us look at some of the emerging technologies and whether we are adopting to these technologies or not. Let's start with the automated work papers and audit management software. So many internal audit departments, even today, they are relying solely on aged, out-of-date software such as Microsoft Office, Word, Excel. Clearly, these audit functions are not leveraging the power of automated work papers and audit management software packages which are now available. Hopefully, this is beginning to change. According to the Institute of Internal Auditors 2022 Pulse of Internal Audit report, 54% of internal audit respondents said they want to invest more on dedicated internal audit management platforms. Advanced data analytics. As a profession, internal auditors have always been chasing data analytics ghost for well over a decade. I mean, we've basically just been chasing this ghost, but we haven't caught up with it. And while plenty of progress has been made, a common complaint amongst internal audit leaders is that they are still not using data analytics sufficiently in their daily internal audit work. According to the IIA Pulse report, 8% of respondents want to invest more in this area. Next, open issue tracking. Some organizations, particularly the large, complex ones in highly regulated industries, they might have open audit issues. You know, these are audit issues that we haven't closed when we're doing our audit, numbering in the hundreds, sometimes even in the thousands, which require follow-up and they require active tracking. Now, to be doing this active tracking in an Excel spreadsheet or in a simple Access database, it's okay, but it's not very efficient and it's not very effective, you'll agree. I mean, automating this process is obviously not easy, but the payoff can be massive. And then there is GRC tools, which is governance, risk management, and compliance tools. Internal audit needs to improve at leveraging these tools as well. If for no other reason than to better collaborate with key second line functions in the organization, because they're the ones who are using these tools, and we need to get on board and also start working with them. Then there's robotic process automation. Now, wow, some people will say, what is this? Only early adopters have gone down this path. But leveraging robotic process automation to automate manual tasks, such as copying and pasting data between applications or reconciling and cross-referencing data, it can free up precious resources and staff to do what we need them to do most, which is think. That's what we want our staff to be doing. So according to the, again, internal audit report, the Pulse report, 34% of respondents said they wanted to spend more time on RPA. Next is artificial intelligence. According to many consultants, artificial intelligence has the potential to transform internal audit in ways that we only dreamed about a few years ago. And despite this revolutionizing effect, very few internal auditors have even begun to experiment with using AI in internal audit. It's a good bet that in a few years, the ability to apply AI could separate the leading internal audit departments from the low performers and the outdated guys. So this is one area you definitely want to focus on in bringing into internal audit. And then we look at machine learning, drones, robots, and the metaverse. For a vast majority of internal audit departments, these technologies, they sit far, far away, far into the horizon. Some can't even imagine how they would begin to use them. But the remote work trend has accelerated such advancements. Some companies, for example, are using drones to audit inventory when they can't walk through warehouses in person. If you haven't even thought about how these technologies could be applied to internal audit, you may want to get connected in these areas. Indeed, 31% of the Pulse report respondents said they want to invest in these areas in the coming months and years. So, why is internal audit behind on technology adoption? I mean, most internal audit leaders know that they simply need to get better at adopting new technologies and acquiring or training a new generation of internal auditors who can apply those technologies for them. The same productivity survey found a huge skills gap in the ability to enable technology in internal audit functions and to innovate to give a higher rate of return. So the question is, what is holding internal audit department back? What gets in the way of adoption of technology in internal audit? Let's look at some of these barriers. I mean, excuse my slide. I've said the excuses. I know internal auditors don't make excuses, but some of the barriers or some of the challenges, do become excuses because they are so difficult to surmount. But let's go through each one of them. So one of them is don't have a budget. Like many functions, internal audit department never really has enough money or time or even resources to get done what it needs to get done. And every internal audit leader can legitimately say this is the correct position. If there are some major expenditures which are not in the budget, the only time you're likely to spend on those items is when there is some crisis. But by that point, it's probably too late. So adopting technology is not a crisis itself, but failure to adopt technology is likely to create a future crisis. Just one that will be brewing under the surface until it manifests itself, and by then it will be too late. So if you have a well-crafted and broadly embraced strategic plan and the tactics to achieve your strategic plan, these are thoroughly understood, then the only battle you should really have is getting the money in your budget to do what you want to do. Keep in mind that the cost of technology purchase is only the beginning. Once you've bought the technology, you also need to be prepared for organizational delays that come with employee training, onboarding vendors who overpromise and they underdeliver. You will have downtime for your staff, and it's basically going to be a steep learning curve and much more. So all these cost time and money, and they will increase the all-in price tag when you bring new technology in. I mean, the good news is that internal audit in many cases is gaining more support from senior management and from the board when it comes to adopting new technologies. Again, going back to the Productivity 2022 internal audit survey, what that found is that nearly 2/3, 66% of chief audit executives said that the audit committee showed a medium to high level of interest in internal audit's plan to undertake innovative and transformative activities. So the next challenge or barrier that we have is that we don't have time. We all feel like we never have time to get done what we need to get done. There's even a name for this thing. It's called the tyranny of the urgent. Basically, we know that it is pressing and we know that we need to get technology there, but we've got so many of these immediate things that fill up our to-do lists. We never really get around to doing them. We basically spend time fixing the burning issues, which are placed in our hands, and such as, our internal audit reports, scheduling our meetings, planning the next internal audit report, and so on and so forth. We know what all these are, but it becomes a catch-22 situation because we don't have time to innovate because we need to get done the tasks which are at hand. And then the tasks at hand, they take up so much of our time because we didn't innovate and we didn't automate them that we never get time to actually go and automate. So it's a never-ending treadmill, and it's something that we have to disrupt because it's a vicious cycle. If you don't disrupt it, you're just going to be left behind. You have to basically, technology has to become urgent on the agenda. You have to make time for it, full stop. The next challenge is that we don't have the right people. And when internal audit leaders are hiring, they normally, who are the people that we look for? We look for people who will be great internal audit professionals. We don't think hard enough about emerging technologies, and we basically limit our requirements to the technology that we're using today. But that's not what we should be looking at. We actually should be looking at what can technology do for us tomorrow, and we should be hiring people with those sort of skills as well. For example, we should be looking at people, who are data scientists and people who are IT savvy, as well as have got some kind of internal audit background. If you get people with technology, you can surely train them on internal audit, but it's not the other way around. If you've got people who are very good internal auditors, but they are not technologically savvy, you're not going to get them to adopt new technologies. You're not going to get them to take leadership when it comes to driving technology in internal audit. Then the next thing we hear about is we don't have the right leadership. Again, our audit leaders, they, you can't actually do everything in a hands-on way. If you try to do everything, it's just going to become much. Some of the things we have to delegate. And one of the things that you actually should delegate to somebody who's an expert is bringing in the technology to do things the right way. So if the only factor that you've got is a budget, a limited budget, then obviously this is something you have to make a business case for, prepare your business case, and then find the experts who can bring in the technology and train the people, including yourselves, and then actually move you to the next ladder. You don't want to be in a situation where you don't have the expertise, none of your staff have the expertise, and because of that, you simply feel, hang on, I don't want to take on this project because if I do take it on, I'm not going to be able to see it right through because we know that they can be very challenging. Make your business case, get in the experts, and move up the ladder. The next complaint we hear about is that we don't have proper support, but we know that internal audit is not an island. Yeah, we can't really work on our own. Most of the organization, sometimes they understand what we do, but sometimes they don't actually understand what we do. So the idea is you have to have a collaborative approach. You have to build strong relationships with all the people who are going to be part of your success, particularly your stakeholders. And building those relationships is key. If you're working there, basically just running your program, and you're not actually building the right networks, you've got to have networks at the strategy level. You've got to have networks at the key stakeholders who you're going to audit, who you're going to help to change, and then you need to make sure that they come on board. They need to be convinced that what you are doing is going to help them. You remember also that each department has its own challenges. They have their own priorities. They have their own to-do list. So internal audit normally is not high priority for them. But if you have the ability to connect with them and to merge your initiatives with their initiatives so that it's a win-win, then they're going to help to basically push your agenda as well. So again, you need a different approach there. Then the next thing we hear about is that we don't have the right knowledge on our team. Again, I alluded to this. If you don't have the right knowledge on your team, start bringing the skills in. Start bringing the skills that you will need to be able to change. If you need data analysts, go and look for data analysts or provide training. If you need new software and you want to move from being manual to using audit software, do that. Invest in people. Also invest in people who are going to be adept at future trends. The last one really is inertia and complacency. And this, by the way, if there's any one of those that is not an excuse, this one sometimes can become an excuse. And we've heard this many, many times. Sometimes you hear internal audit leaders saying, well, this is the way we've always done it. So, it's working. here's my audit program, and he's got a nice spring file with his audit program, or he's got programs from the last year. I remember when I joined audit, that's what we used to do. We had spring files, with our audit programs nicely ticked, and that's what we used year after year. That's not the way it works now. You also hear audit leaders saying, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Well, we know this is not the way to do things. I mean, there's always that old adage, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But we're not talking about that in internal audit. In internal audit, we know that people have moved forward. And if we don't know, there's a gentleman, George Washington Carver, he said 99% of all failures come from people who have the habit of making excuses. So let's not do that. Let's be amongst those who innovate and move on. So what can we do? I think it's pretty simple and it's pretty basic. What we have to do is think strategically and not just think tactically. We should have a strategic plan for internal audit which embraces emerging technologies and innovation. And it doesn't matter what the size of your internal audit department is, you need to create a process for reviewing the viability and potential of emerging technology as part of your audit plan. In other words, you don't want to just bury your head in the sand. Be clear on your mission and what outcomes are important to achieve your mission strategically. Then be extra hard on your evaluation and assessment of what systems and processes will get you the most success and leverage them to realize those outcomes. I will bet technology adoption will be part of that. So next, go about the task of cost justifying what you need by talking about how it will make the internal audit function better, how it will allow you to attract better talent, increase and tie it to successful execution of your strategic internal audit plan, which you should be able to connect to the company's strategic plan itself. And finally, find or create the budget, make the time, get the right people, be a leader, and garner the needed support from all your stakeholders. And finally, obtain the knowledge that you need. You need to fight inertia, you need to nip complacency in the bud, and you need to be fearless. Your technologically dependent, value added, and relevant future actually depends on it. And when you do this, you can be rest assured your audit committee will be pleased with your tech-enabled evolution and creating value, and basically the speed at which you're able to move from one area to another area. So I'm just going to hand over now to my colleague George to take you through the next couple of sessions. George.
Thank you, Zahir. Taking it over from where Zahir has left, and just to have an understanding of how important IT is to you as an internal auditor, I'll try and identify with you as a person with interest in internal audit or as a chief internal audit executive, just to have an understanding of how important this is to you. And taking it over from what IAIA has put together in a GTAG, IT Essential for Internal Auditors. That issue indicated the major concerns that would be required of you as an internal auditor when you're looking at your organization as a house. You need to be able to provide your consulting activities and assurance to the board, monitoring and compliance review, but within an IT environment. And as an internal auditor, you need to understand these issues. Critical to this is the IT governance, how IT affects service and project delivery. Critical IT and technical issues like network, infrastructure, applications, IT processes, service management, information security, business resiliency, data management, And of the emerging issues, there are so many emerging issues that have been mentioned by Zahir and which Nevland would mention later in this webinar, which you as an internal auditor needs to identify with. You know, how are you doing data analytics? Are you using that as a tool? Because the organizations have adopted so much IT that you as an internal auditor need to be able to respond and be proactive in this instead of being reactive. And it's what from our previous webinar, we emphasized that you need to have a disruptive approach to the processes, to approach to audit, so that when you are doing whatever it is that we are looking at, you're aware of what is happening around you. When you're mentioning about the internal audit function of the future, the emphasis on innovation and IT was a part of this, because the process starts at how the organizations is managing its risks. Strategy, as has been mentioned by Zahir, the agility and dynamic approach towards what your stakeholders are focusing on, how you are leveraging on automation and analytics, which is a common day tool to you as an internal auditor. And then, do you have to really outsource IT as a function, or do you, as a chief audit executive or internal auditor, need to consider it as a skill so that you also optimize your function in your delivery for this, for your services to the organization? Then, on your right, I have this risk epicenter. Our delivery of our results will be in an environment where, as we mentioned from our previous webinar, it will require agile audit. You as an internal audit executive needs to apply intelligent automation. Within that IT system, you need to be able to pick up the blind spots. You need to be able to provide your risk insight in that environment. And this can only be done, digitally. And for risk purposes, you have to monitor it, on a continuous basis. And it will require you to pick up few technological enablers for you to be able to do this. And Nevlin will come in and pick on this. There are things like data analytics, which you need to pick up a skill on, process intelligence, and robotics. Now, technology enables you as an internal audit function to change how you are doing things. And we mentioned during our last webinar that you need to be agile. A quick question: how many of us as Chief Internal Audit Executive are still manual in way of doing things? You're still using Excel. You don't have an IT supported software to help you conduct your internal audit. You haven't digitized your process end to end. Now, the two triangles on your left and right considers how your emphasis is depending on whether you're manual or automated. If you're manual, you're probably spending so much time in gathering data. All in all, you'll have to do the manual testing and providing little insight and analysis at the top. Now, technology comes in to reinvent this and change how you do things, because it brings in data flow and automation and analytics in your function, visualization and analytics, RPA, which Nevland will mention. Emerging, you will be able to handle emerging and advanced technologies in your processes and function, so that it takes lesser time for you to do data gathering. You still have to apply your human input in testing and analyzing the data, but you're in a better position to provide insight and analysis to the management and the board. The opportunity to use IT and apply analytics and technology can be found throughout the internal audit lifecycle. It starts from your risk assessment, how you're doing your compliance analysis, your ERM, risk monitoring, business profiling, your strategic planning. In your planning, risk assessment, scoping, sampling, compliance, financial audits. In your field work, as it will be mentioned later, you can be able to do multi-unit auditing, 100% coverage in your data testing and analysis. How you are validating your processes and control will be end-to-end using your system. And you can be able to do scenario modeling because IT will be able to be, it will be an enabler to you so that when you're doing your function, it becomes a tool in itself. And even in reporting, you'll shift from the historical paper reporting which you're used to executive reports, dashboards, presentation, and compliance metrics, which can be shared by management or to the management and to the board in an easier format than what we've traditionally been used to. So when you fully integrate data analytics into your function, it's not just a program, rather it's a technique that is fully embedded into all elements of your audit life cycle. Yeah, it drives you to deliver solutions and not handle problems, as previously has been to a function. And this is critical because it will determine how your maturity model is in your audit function. So digital upskilling, as we mentioned in our first webinar, is critical to you as an internal auditor. You need to up your skills on ERP, cybersecurity, cloud management. What's your business acumen when it comes to the industry knowledge of IT? There are things that are being mentioned every now and then, cognitive intelligence, machine learning, AIs. Many of our organizations have embedded some APIs to do certain functions within our organizations. How is it as an internal auditor? Will you respond to those and conduct your audit function and still provide assurance to the executive that those APIs that have been embedded into your system are actually functioning well, they are being kept in check, they are adhering to your policies and procedures, they're not prone to any errors, they're not misuse of any privileges, and everyone within the organization is aware of what is happening with some of these bots that have been introduced and embedded in our systems. And then there is the whole data analytics that comes in with the use of technology and IT within the organization. You as an internal auditor or chief audit executive, can you be able to manage data analytics? Have you picked up a few techniques that can help you to interpret data as it comes from the system and be able to communicate the results through some visualization tools? Because some of the people who are sitting in our audit committees are still not aware and conversant of these tools. Okay, so we need an elevated digital IQ for the team. You need to be able to identify the opportunities that are existing in the market for you to be able to handle your functions quite well. And that's the only way you'll become more effective through your function, and you'll collaborate with your internal stakeholders to be able to deliver value to them. At this stage, I'll hand it over to Nevland to be able to give us real tools that will help us handle the digital transformation within our internal audit function. Nevland.
Thank you, George, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be joining you today, and I look forward to taking you through digital transformation in internal audit. So I'm going to start off my session today by putting this very, very busy picture onto the screen for you today, just to have a look at. And I'm going to touch on certain areas, so don't get confused about reading through the entire thing. I'm going to talk in a lot of detail through this and cover all of the different pieces as we are going along. So one of the things that I think is very important that I mention to everyone is that we are in a position now where what we are seeing across the world is that the entire world of corporate entities, in fact, the entire world, is moving towards becoming platform-based and data-led organizations. Now, my colleagues today have already covered to a certain extent the risk that we might become obsolete. Now, what we are seeing is with companies changing so fast and becoming platform-based and data-led, is that very, very quickly, the traditional internal audit of the past is becoming more and more irrelevant to the needs of a platform-based and digital business. Now, the journey that most companies are on at the moment is they need to go through a series of intense digital transformation to make sure that they either want to achieve one of two objectives. They either want to reduce their costs or they want to grow their top-line revenues. And in doing that, ultimately want to achieve a higher profit. And in doing that, I think they are all on a journey. And that journey of digital transformation is ultimately about partnerships, ventures, but most importantly, how do we pull in all the emerging technologies that we need? Now, if you look at my picture here on the right, internal audit as we know it, in fact, combined assurance as we know it, is not being driven from a platform-based data-led point of view. So, I mean, we've got all these lines of defense that are sitting, and we are all trying to run in a business. Now, from all of the businesses that I speak to, management operate on systems, risk operate on their own systems, and internal audit operate on their own systems. And then, you eventually get to external audit, the regulator and the board, all operating off their own systems and all doing their own thing. Now, what the challenge of all of this is that we often get asked the question about duplication. Now, duplication is driven purely because it's very difficult to get alignment of all the different areas or lines of defense unless you've got a single platform and, most importantly, a single data source. So if you look at the top right-hand side of my picture. So part of the digital transformation of internal audit is to say, if our companies are platform-based and data-led, how do we get to a position where our assurance functions is also platform-based and data-led? Now, if you look right at the bottom, and it's the starting block for everything that I'm going to talk about today, we talk about data governance, strong data governance, right at the bottom on the red. Now, why that's important for us around data governance is that you'll often go to conferences or you'll see technology people speaking, or you'll see a presentation on YouTube or an advert talking about artificial intelligence. I just want to tell everyone in the room with us today that you cannot do any artificial intelligence unless you've got your key building blocks in place. Now, part of those building blocks that we talk about is, firstly, you need to have governance over your data. Now, in some organizations, some industries, and some countries, data governance has become part of regulation. I know the privacy acts that are coming into East Africa at the moment, specifically Kenya, is more from a privacy. But if I take the South African banking sector at the moment, they actually have a Basel standard called BCBS 239, where they actually are making South African banks comply through regulation with data governance. Now, data governance, look, in some cases is forced by law, but it is the right thing to do, because if you do not have your data governance in place, you cannot rely on the data that's actually driving your business. And the process that you need to follow and the building blocks that I spoke about was you first need to get data governance in place. After you've got data governance in place, you need to have your data and analytics working. Once you have your data and analytics working, you need to have your automation working. And once your automation is working, you can then eventually look at things like machine learning as well as artificial intelligence. My apologies, I see that I did not have my camera on. Just give me a second. There we go. So in going through all of this that we are doing today and talking about, I think it's very important. Do not try and turn on artificial intelligence in an internal audit division unless you've walked the journey of first starting with data governance, data and analytics, thereafter automation, and then you can look at machine learning and AI. Now, why it is important to start this journey is that if you do not start this journey and your competitors start to get ahead and your function becomes irrelevant, you can't just magically go and turn on artificial intelligence unless you've made the investments as part of that roadmap to get to where you want to get to. Now, one of the big things that I see a lot at a lot of my clients is this need for sample-based testing versus maximum assurance, the need for periodic assurance versus continuous assurance, and the need for that cost that it costs you to do that to be cheaper, or if at worst case, the same. Now, why this is important for everyone to note is currently, if you look at your layers of defense, if you were getting sort of 1% coverage, that would be a high percentage at the moment because the number of transactions that we have are growing exponentially. So what we are seeing across planet Earth at the moment, and I'll share an interesting stat with all of you, is that planet Earth has now doubled its data. It used to be in the last 12 months. It's now in the last 11 months. So in the last 11 months, planet Earth has doubled the quantity of data. But I take a bet with all of you in the room with us today that your sample sizes have probably stayed the same over the last 12 months, which means your coverage has effectively halved just because of data and transactions growing at the rapid rate that it is. So we need to get to a position, and platform-based internal audit can get us to a position where we can actually govern our data and get to a point where we can provide maximum assurance. So let's audit everything. Just go back to where we can cover everything. So maximum assurance, do it every day if we needed to, and get to a point where we can provide this assurance continuously into our business at a cost point that is the same, or if not lesser than what we are currently doing. And one of the beauties of doing this thing, so I'm going to take you to the 3 blocks at the bottom called risk models, intelligent risk assessment, and predictive risk assessment, is if we get this entire platform right, we can have management, risk, internal audit, and external audit all sitting on a single platform. And on the single platform, if we put all of our building blocks in place, we can get to a point where we can actually help entities and businesses predict what's going to happen in the future. Because if you look at the way the world is moving at the moment, 95% of all AI patents are owned by the US and China. And where we're going to be at from an internal audit perspective is management are not going to see value in what was originally said or what happened in the past. I mean, you've seen it. You go to your client, you go to management with a finding about something that happened 13 months ago, and they're like, the business has moved on from there. But imagine if you had to go to your stakeholders and say to them, listen, we've modeled the data and we predict in 6 months' time, if our revenue growth carries on the way that it does, and the number of people that we're employing carries on the way that it does, we're probably going to have 10% worth of misstatements coming through in this specific area of the business. And we've been able to predict this based on the setup that we have. Now, again, I'm going to stress once again for everyone else, for everyone on the call, that the key to this entire journey and this dream is we need to start building with data governance being our first building block to get us to the platform-based internal audit of the future. And that is an incredible digital transformation of the entire internal audit function. Now, why this is very relevant for everyone is every journey starts with the first step. And the first step is actually to have the plan down in terms of how we are going to do this and how we are going to achieve this over a period of time. Now, I want to just share an example with the end goal in mind of a real example that happened at a bank, within a bank internal audit function, where they were actually able to predict in January of 2020, where in the African continent, COVID wasn't really something that was spoken about or predicted. But this bank specifically had a function running on specific areas where they were able to predict risk into the future. And through the internal audit function, they were able to predict that there was going to be national lockdowns that were going to be coming within the South African market. And the recommendation that was written was that they need to start investigating payment holiday products. Now, the bank, the report went to 11 audit committee members at the time. 10 of them said the robots have gone crazy, And one said, oh, let's just humor this and let's go build these payment holiday products, which when COVID hit in South Africa and the lockdown then came into effect, we ended up in a position where they were first to market with their product. Now, for me, that's the future of where I see the assurance functions moving, but it is a journey that will get us there. So we can move to the next slide. Now, on any digital transformation, even if the digital transformation is within the internal audit space, I can tell you from speaking to numerous clients who've been able to spend in excess of 100,000 up to $1 million on some of their transformation programs. The one thing that is often ignored is the thing on the left-hand side, which is your people. Now, the internal audit of the future needs different skills in different levels and different quantities, which means your current teams that you have in place have got one of two choices. One, sit and carry on ticking their samples of 15 and 25 until they become obsolete. Or option two, reskill themselves to the skills of the future in order to fit in with the transformation. Now, what we're seeing across the internal audit of the future, or the digitally transformed internal audit function, is that you're going to need a lot more specialist skills, and you're probably going to need them in higher quantities. And you're going to need those specialist skills to also understand the business. And if they don't do that, or we don't put a plan of reskilling and retraining to take our people along the journey, we're going to end up with obsolete functions, because no matter how much money you throw at the technology side, if you don't have the right people to, or you don't have a plan to change your people into the right people, you're going to end up in a position where your function is just not going to run, no matter how bright your vision for the future is. And the last block under people is time and material versus levels of assurance. So we often see internal audit plans at the moment come out. And on these internal audit plans, what we see is that next to each audit, we write the number of hours we plan to spend. And I think that move needs to be a move that we move away from, because we need to get to a position where we say, on this audit, we're going to give you 100% assurance continuously, and this is the price you're going to pay for that piece of assurance. So it's more moving away from inputs and starting to focus more on the outputs. On the process side of things, I think we need to re-engineer a lot of the processes that we follow in internal audit. So if it's planning session, the junior team goes out, does all the work, comes back with the report, the senior people sit and fight with all the governance stakeholders around the findings, and then we issue the final report. That won't work, because we're effectively going to get to a position where this audit results will be available on a daily basis. So how do we re-engineer current internal audit processes, as an example, in terms of how to deal with that? Around quality and risk, I mean, the current quality processes and risk processes we got running in internal audit will need to change to cater for this platform-based business. It's just something that we need to have. The engagement with the IIA and other stakeholders becomes very important, because imagine we get to a position where we are issuing reports on a daily basis. Management are going to say, we don't have time to sit and go through these reports on a daily basis. So understanding what the role of management and the other lines of defense and fitting in on the platform becomes critical. And I think I sort of touched on it with COVID-19 at the start, but anyone who set a plan in January 2020, in the year of the COVID lockdowns, your plan would have been irrelevant within 3 or 4 months. Yet probably in the room with us today, we've probably got 99% of our teams that are still setting annual audit plans, even though the risk is changing so fast. And with the technology and the move of our businesses moving towards platform-based and data-led, we end up in a position where businesses are just changing too fast, in fact, faster than what COVID hit us at. And if we do not change our processes in terms of how we do an internal audit plan, then we're going to end up in a position where our function eventually becomes irrelevant and becomes non-value adding. The next thing, which I sort of drilled into on the previous slide, was around data. Is auditors and internal auditors by their nature love using structured data. So when I talk about structured data, give it to me in an Excel file that I can do audit work. And most of our clients have the most amazing, beautiful data and analytics solutions, but they cannot source the data that they need to run those applications. So interesting stat for everyone. the world's data at the moment is made up of 99.8% of unstructured data and only 0.2% of structured data. So if you want to have a function that can properly operate into the future, you need to start tapping into the 99.8% of data, which is unstructured data. So let me give you an example of a crazy procedure that can be run. You go to the call center of an organization. You go and download all of the voice recordings of the call center. You don't need to listen to them. You process it through a machine learning or AI capable solution, and you use psychological algorithms to detect in people's voices when there's a higher risk of something going wrong. Based on what that algorithm detects for you, you can then follow up, okay, these were the calls that affected these people's accounts, assuming it's a bank or if it's a retail company, and these are the ones we need to do detailed procedures on. But it's not an audit procedure that you'll see very often at the moment. And the reason why you've got this is because we don't like to touch unstructured data, and we need to get to a place where we can start touching unstructured data. So just a terminology for everyone. I think we talk a lot about data warehouses. One of the most important words that I want you to take away from today is something called a data lake. Now, a data lake, the difference between a data warehouse and a data lake is that a data warehouse holds structured data, whereas a data lake can hold structured and unstructured data. So if we're building the internal audit function of the future, we need to be able to connect up and utilize the data lake's evidence so that we can streamline and change our audits to be able to cater for the internal audit of the future. Then the last pillar, and I've deliberately left it last, is because of technology. You can see so far what I've spoken to you about is people, process, and data. I haven't mentioned a word about technology. Now, this is where a lot of organizations are getting it wrong at the moment. They buy their technology first and expect their people, process, and data to fit into the technology. But the right way to do it is to understand what your people are going to look like, what your process is going to look like, ultimately what your data is going to look like, and then choose a technology that makes sense for what you are doing. So one of the things I want to share with all of you today, the word data and analytics is probably a very abused word in internal audit. I do a lot of data and analytics, but for me, one of the most important things that I do is I do something called digital audit. Now, let me explain to you what the difference is. Digital audit is the process of taking the entire audit process, not just substantive testing or control testing, but the entire process of the audit, from planning to engagement letters to execution to completion to finally reporting, and streamlining that process end to end to automate working papers, automate reporting, automate engagement letters, drive intelligence, provide insights, all through the use of technology. And we've been able to do this. So one of the examples that I'm going to share with you as we're going through today is through a digital audit, we've been able to reduce the time spent on certain hours, on certain audits, from 450 hours down to 15 minutes, right? And whenever I share this with clients, they say to me, oh, so the price of this audit is going to come down. I say to them, no, it's actually not the price of the audit that's going to come down. It might be a little cheaper, a little bit more expensive. But what we're going to do for the same price is we're going to give you maximum assurance, do it for you continuously. And the reason why it still costs the same is because instead of us investing in people and hours to deliver the audit, we're actually spending and investing in technology that we then recover through the use and selling of our products. So we've already been able to achieve, I like to call it one of the world's first 15-minute audits. There could be other people that are doing it, but we've been able to achieve it and achieve it consistently across a number of clients. You can go to the next slide. So here's an example for you. This is a very typical sort of basic cybersecurity audit. And I didn't want to confuse anyone with some of the more advanced things that we've been able to do, but I'll just put one of the advanced things on the table before I touch on this one. So we've been able to conclude on an audit, an internal audit. We were able to review 6,500 leases through the use of machine learning and artificial intelligence. Again, we had done the investments in data and analytics, AI, data and analytics, as well as automation in order to get us to this position. But on this very simple product, We call it a basic security hygiene test. And these are 41 controls. Now, we were able to audit all of these 41 controls, including working papers, a report, and a list of findings and recommendations from the time we had connected our technology up to our client system. We were able to achieve the result, and wait for it, under 10 minutes, right? I say 15 minutes because we just like someone to read over what the entire robot process has done for us. But that is the power of digitally transforming your internal audit function. And here's the best part. We can do the audit every single day for a client, provide them with working papers and reports on a daily basis. We could even do it every hour if they really wanted us to do it. And I think this is the power of why you want to do a digital transformation of your audit process. And I must stress to everyone, across all of these, we effectively came out with 41 working papers covering design, implementation, and operating effectiveness, and a final report with the findings. All compliant, quality reviewed by an external reviewer to make sure we had achieved sufficient appropriate audit evidence and that the conclusions that we had ended off with were actually correct. So this is a very simple example of one of the audits that we have covered. Next slide. Right. And here you go in terms of what the report looked like. This report was automatically put together. It came out with all of this analysis and all of these insights that we're able to provide to the client. It has Power BI functionality. So if you click on any of the reds, it will actually show you all of the detail about what broke and when it happened. And based on this is the final report that we put in front of a client that gives you maximum assurance over this specific area. And again, I'll stress, this entire report was created with zero human intervention. So it all ran end to end from engagement letter through to the end. So I think this is a great example of a report. And I'm going to just share something, because one of the jobs that I do is I meet with a lot of clients who give me their internal audit plans and say to me, listen, can you have a look at it and tell me which part of this plan cannot be digitized? And I'm yet to find a procedure that cannot be digitized, but I have found procedures that do not have the right level of data to run. So the synopsis to take out from that is, in the future, in fact, even now, almost every single audit procedure that's done by a human being can be digitally automated from start to finish. Just pause and think about that for a second. Okay, we can move down to the next one, right? And I think I sort of stressed this to you as you're going, but I just wanted to put it again, just to almost remind everyone of the journey that you're on. So these are all the different types of technologies and things that you need to be doing. You can see throughout my presentation, I haven't spoken too much about a specific technology, but if you do not build your data and data, if you just try and put AI on, your little house is going to come tumbling down. If you just try and do automation, your house will come tumbling down. Maybe not as hard if you just try AI, but important. On your journey, start with data governance. If your business does not have governed data, rather start writing up findings for them that the data is not governed. Now, we all know, I sort of said it at the beginning, the entire world is moving towards platform-based and data-led. So if everyone is following that strategy, how is everyone all going to be successful? And I'll tell you the answer as to how. The companies that have the highest volume of data and the highest quality of data are going to be able to create the newest products in the world fastest, as well as be able to keep their costs at the lowest, as well as provide the greatest customer experience, because that's a word we hear about a lot. So on the journey, if we do not become platform-based and data-led from an internal audit perspective, our respective functions are going to become very redundant very quickly. And some executives that I speak to and some board members that I speak to, they say to me, no, Nev, you're wrong. This thing, I'll be dead before any of these things happens. I don't need to worry about it. So I'm going to share something with everyone today. It's called Moore's Law. And what Moore's Law is effectively saying is that things can increase at an increasing rate. And where we are with technology at the moment, I mean, for most people in the room today, I mean, the two big developments you would have gone through in your life so far would have been one, cell phones, and 2 systems coming in, right? Or the internet, let's call it the internet, let's not go with systems. Now, the predictions, when I speak to technologists who actually study this for a living, is that we're going to see a rate of change between now and 2030, where the influx of technology means we're going to see changes as large as cell phones coming in, happening every 3 years. Now, what that means is this reality that I've put in front of you becomes a reality very quickly and a lot more faster than what it was 20 years ago. So one of the key things that any leader in the internal audit space needs to have is the ability to be agile and be able to adapt. Because if you don't have agility and the ability to adapt at the moment, you're going to end up in a position where you're going to become outdated very, very fast and very, very quickly. And the technology is not waiting for anyone. So I'll throw a crazy idea out to everyone. Eventually, technology companies, when they get to targeting assurance functions, they're going to be able to build technologies and solutions that are going to be able to audit better. Imagine if Google said, listen, just plug Google straight into your systems and we'll do your audit for you on an annual basis, and you can just click and put your credit card details and subscribe. That is where the world is heading at the moment in terms of platform-based and data-led. So very important, follow the journey. There is pain along this journey because you need to change people, and change management is very important, but it's a journey worth walking. And in any ways, even if the journey is a complete fail, the skills and the experience you'll pick up in learning about these different things and how it transforms the world is going to be absolutely critical to keep your function relevant into the future. And I think that is it from me for today. I'll just cover, I sort of just touched on this as we were going through around the data governance, but just out of interest for everyone. It's just, what is data governance? And again, data governance is not just technology. And I've got a short answer for everyone in the room with us today. If you say to me, the CIO in your organization is responsible for data, you've already gotten it wrong. And for all of you, you should go back to your respective stakeholders and write a finding immediately if your CIO is the person that's responsible for your data. Ultimately, the owner of your data at the moment is the board. And if the board don't have the processes, procedures, and activities in place to manage data, it means we potentially have a problem, because your greatest asset into the platform-based data-led world is actually going to be your data. Okay, so then this last one around adoption around data governance is, I often get asked by executives and they often tell me, okay, we're going to invest in data governance, but Nev, I need to go back to the board and I need to justify what's my return on investment in terms of building up a data governance program across my organization. And in a numerous, I can share, some of the South African banks have spent as much as 700 million rands or closer to R1 billion on some of their programs around data governance. And the reason why they've made it part of the regulation in banks in South Africa is it's the only way the regulator can trust all of the reporting that's happening in their environments. So to get executives, especially executives who grew up in the world that did not have exponential change in it, to get executive buy-in is an incredibly tough job to do, because at the end of the day, they all get judged at the end of the year in terms of what their returns on investment are. And data governance is not an investment that returns as quickly as it should, but it's a key foundational block of what you need to do. In terms of responsibility, you now have people who are responsible for controls becoming responsible for data, where they actually own the data in the organization as part of a process. That's incredibly challenging because most people don't have the skills in order to play those roles, and the number of data professionals are becoming incredibly scarce, not because they are immigrating or they don't exist, but the demand for data people has increased exponentially, and there's just not enough demand. Not enough supply, which means that often what ends up happening is the price of these resources are becoming more and more expensive. The training programs that exist, I mean, you can look online, there's tons of programs available for training around data governance. The problem is it's not being given the attention that it should be globally, which means we're not creating as planet Earth enough data governance professionals to help us build the foundations that are needed. A standard framework in terms of what we are trying to do. So what is the data governance framework that we have in order to manage our organization, and what's our strategy around data? Great question to ask within your organization. And then the last one, which is probably the biggest one, is that we are sitting with a lack of knowledge, because we end up in a position where there's just no knowledge. And if you go through your organizations and start having the discussion around data governance, most people will say, oh no, it's just GDPR, or in South African terms, it's just POPIA. But it's so much bigger and so much further in terms of that. And the sad reality with data governance is, if your clients get it right, or if your competitors get it right, and they start offering new products and services at a low cost base that ultimately drives their revenues through the ceiling, organizations are just going to fall away, because it's going to be too quick. It's going to take them too long to catch up, because as I mentioned earlier, you can't just turn the AI on to compete. You're going to end up trying to compete against AI with people. And for those of you that have tried, I mean, try watch AI play against a human chess player, the world's best chess player. It's impossible to beat it with humans on the board. So one of the things that we help a lot of clients with do, excuse me, one of the things we help our clients with is that we do different types of reviews for them. And often we start with a tier 1 review. So if you're sitting in an organization where you haven't even heard the word data governance, you don't even know if there's a program, and you just need someone to put a report in front of your organization that says, listen, here's all the reds across things that you are getting wrong from a data perspective. We often do a tier 1 type of review, which is very quick, very easy. It's very questionnaire driven and very much around interviews and delivering the tough message. If you're on your track and you're like, okay, no, we've done some sort of investments and we're feeling a bit okay, we've got some policies in place, we can do a tier 2 review, which is our tier 1 review, but we also take it forward and look at some of the implementation of some of the data governance areas. And then number 3, which is being done here, we've done it a number of clients across the South African market, where we do a full end-to-end review of the data governance within your organization. Sorry, just got distracted. And that's a very comprehensive report that gives you an end-to-end view and helps you ultimately develop your own roadmap from an implementation perspective to understand how you are going to get to a point where data can become your most valuable asset. Because when it's sitting in its unstructured and structured format, you can't actually extract any value out of it to give you competitive advantage. But where you've governed it, automated it, and managed it in such a way, that is a great space within which you can partner with other organizations, do different types of ventures, and actually win the race in terms of becoming platform-based and data-led. So yeah, it's been a great pleasure presenting to you today. I'm going to hand back to Zahir for some concluding thoughts.
Thanks, Neverland, and it's been a pleasure presenting to all of you today. We've overrun a little bit, and my apologies for that. We had a couple of questions which I think we've answered. If there are any other questions, we'll take those questions. Otherwise, we can close the session. You can just type those in the chat section or in the Q&A section. Otherwise, we have our next webinar is in a couple of weeks.
Hi, Zahir. Good afternoon again, everyone. My name is Virginia. I believe all the questions that were submitted through Q&A and chat have been responded to. In case you have any more questions, you can respond to the email address that sent you the invite. Also, for a recap of today's webinar, you can visit our YouTube channel, BDO in East Africa. The recording will be there. We'll also be sending out the attendance certificate for those who would like to get their CPD points. Thank you so much for today. Thank you, Zahir, George, and Nevlan. Hope to see you on 6th of November for episode 4. Goodbye, everyone.
Bye-bye.